Although not an oil-producing region, Utah has a number of oil refineries. The petroleum industry is one of the most dangerous fields of work among industrial occupations, not only from immediate injury, from asbestos exposure as well. Despite this fact, Utah refineries have a better than average safety record. The state's mortality rate from mesothelioma and other asbestos disease is also lower than many other states. Between 1980 and the year 2000, the population increased by over 33%, from 1.46 million to 2.23 million. During that same period, there were 157 recorded deaths from asbestos disease. 2/3 of these were due to mesothelioma, while the remainder was from asbestosis. These were concentrated along the Wasatch Front, where the majority of the population resides. American Oil, BP Amoco, Chevron, Flying J, Phillips, and Standard are the major oil companies that own and operate refineries in the state of Utah. Other industries in which asbestos exposure is a risk include Intermountain Power and DuPont Chemical. All of these companies are located in Salt Lake City and Provo. Asbestos hazards in the oil industries. In 2003, British researchers studied 45,000 workers who had been employed in the oil industry for at least 12 consecutive months between 1946 and 1971. These workers were employed in delivery and distribution or in the tasks of refining crude oil into fuel. There were no abnormal rates of illness among the first group. However, those in the latter category were found to have significantly elevated rates of mesothelioma and other cancers when compared to the general population. The process by which crude oil is refined into gasoline and other products requires the use of heat and chemicals. For this reason, asbestos-containing materials, or ACMs, have been used in oil refineries practically from the beginning of the industry in the 19th century. ACM insulation has been used to protect distillation columns, pipes, and various conduits, as well as working surfaces and other equipment. One of the great ironies is the fact that some of the asbestos exposure suffered by oil refinery workers is from the clothing items intended to protect them from injury. This clothing, overcoats, gloves, hoods, and aprons, was lined with asbestos fabric, which could release fibers when worn or ripped open. Intermountain Power and DuPont Chemical. Any power generation plant poses substantial asbestos exposure risks to those who repair and maintain them. A Puerto Rican study showed asbestos-related abnormalities in 13% of the chest x-rays made of power plant employees. In addition to fire resistance, asbestos provides excellent resistance to electrical current, making it ideal for electrical cloth, conduits, and components of various mechanical devices such as generators and turbines. The latter is a particularly dangerous source of asbestos. As these machines operate, asbestos fibers are thrown out into the air and breathed in by workers. DuPont Chemical, perhaps the worst corporate polluter on Earth, is also listed as an asbestos location. This highlights another quality of asbestos that made it so useful, its resistance to corrosive chemical reactions. In the case of chemical plants, the asbestos of choice is usually crocidolite or amosite. They are both highly resistant to acid and frequently used in countertop or work surface material. General exposure. Utah has a fair number of older and historic buildings. As in the rest of the country, construction occupations, especially those related to demolition and renovation of aging structures, pose a certain amount of danger to workers. Those who work in construction trades should be aware of asbestos issues, particularly in how to identify ACMs when they are encountered. Removal of ACMs should be undertaken only by trained asbestos contractors. In many states, including Utah, only licensed asbestos abatement professionals are allowed to do such work commercially. Violators can be subject to criminal prosecution. Legal resources in Utah. A search through the Utah Federal District Court cases for asbestos-related personal injury product liability lawsuits brings up no recent lawsuits. Utah is ranked 44 in the U.S. for mesothelioma cases. With a mesothelioma mortality rate of 5.83 per million, Utah has a crude mortality rank of 48 in the country. Utah has a number of known asbestos-exposed areas. These include the Intermountain Waste Oil Refinery and the Standard Oil Refinery in Bountiful, Intermountain Power in Delta, the Chevron Oil Refinery in Ogden, and Inland Refining and Phillips Petroleum in Wood Cross. Salt Lake City alone has a number of known exposed areas. These include the American Oil Refinery, BP Amoco, Chevron, Flying J, the Kennecott Copper Mine, and the Standard Oil Refinery. Individuals living or working near these areas should be checked regularly for signs of mesothelioma in order to file any lawsuits within the state's statute of limitations. While many of these sites have been inspected and some have been cleaned up, anyone who worked or lived in these areas before asbestos contamination was reported can still be affected. Also, it is important to keep in mind that these are the only known asbestos sites. Other areas in the state may also contain asbestos, but may have not yet been reported as such. One important asbestos case in Utah took place in 2000. That case, State of Utah by and through Utah Air Quality Board versus the Truman Mortensen Family Trust and Roxanne Jensen Daly, involved Roxanne Jensen Daly, who was responsible for the Truman Mortensen Family Trust, a body which owned properties in Idaho and Utah. In 1997, the Environmental Health Division of the Salt Lake County Health Department ran an analysis of the ceiling tiles as part of the inspection of one of the buildings in the trust owned. The tiles were found to contain asbestos, and the department advised Jensen Daly of the issue. Jensen Daly allegedly hired workers to remove the ceiling. When a Utah State Division of Air Quality, DAQ, inspector arrived at the site, he found that workers hired by Jensen Daly were using improper asbestos handling techniques and were in fact producing large amounts of asbestos-containing dust. 5 days later, the inspector arrived again to witness further violations involving the removal of asbestos. He verbally told Jensen Daly of the dangers and advised her to hire qualified workers. The DAQ then received a phone call from one of the building residents advising the DAQ that after the inspector's departure, Jensen Daly herself was removing asbestos, again incorrectly. The DAQ board issued the trust and Jensen Daly a notice of violation and order to comply or cease and desist for violations of various state asbestos regulations. The document outlined specific code violations, indicated that the order was to become effective immediately and would become final within 30 days unless a hearing was requested in writing, and made clear that failure to comply might result in penalties. Jensen Daly was ultimately fined $23,000, which she appealed repeatedly. The Supreme Court upheld the fine. Those interested in filing lawsuits should know that the statute of limitations for personal injury law in Utah is 2 years, with a discovery rule that states that this amount of time begins when the problem, in this case the mesothelioma, either was discovered or should have been discovered. Wrongful death cases follow the same statute of limitations and discovery rule. There is a special provision for asbestos cases which increases the statute of limitations to 3 years instead of 2. Thank you for watching. This video was produced by Asbestos.Net, a leading resource on all aspects of asbestos and mesothelioma. Our priority is to inform victims about the devastating effects of asbestos exposure, mesothelioma, asbestos cancer, asbestosis, and other asbestos-related diseases, and to advise them with a wealth of information. Individuals whose lives have been touched by mesothelioma have numerous questions and concerns. Their caregivers and family members also need accurate, reliable information. If you or a loved one have been diagnosed with mesothelioma or asbestos cancer and need more information, we invite you to visit and explore the thousands of pages of oncologist-reviewed material on Asbestos.net, to call our convenient toll-free number shown below and speak with a mesothelioma specialist, or to use the simple contact form found at Asbestos.net to request a free copy of our informative books, custom inserts, and DVD. Asbestos.net, information and help for patients and families.